Sometime after his wife had walked out carrying the prenuptial agreement she had written herself, Elias Voss sat on a bench in Marcus Garvey Park with only a modest sum left to his name and nowhere in particular to go. A woman pushing a food cart stopped in front of him. She spoke his name. He did not recognize her. She had not expected him to. Yet the meal she was about to place beside him would unravel a vast fraud and begin restoring everything he had lost, starting with the one thing money had never been able to purchase. She had been looking for him without knowing she was searching. The cart carried the scent of hot oil and onions slowly caramelizing on cast iron, and beneath both a deeper note that had no name yet felt like a kitchen from childhood. The last time she had seen this man, he had held billions and a wife on his arm. Now he sat on a park bench in Harlem with nothing. Elias Voss occupied the third bench from the north entrance of Marcus Garvey Park in Harlem. He had been sitting there for many days. Same bench, same afternoon hour when the light filtered through the trees at an angle that made everything on the path appear to be trying to leave. He was a man in his later years. He wore a charcoal suit that had once cost a great deal. The jacket had not been pressed in weeks. The collar had gone soft. The shirt beneath was clean but wrinkled in the way that happens when laundry is done by hand in a sink and hung on a doorknob to dry. His shoes were fine Italian leather, the left heel worn down on the outer edge from the way he walked. He had not shaved in some time. His hands rested folded in his lap. He was not reading. He was not looking at a phone. He was looking at the path before him, the way people gaze at things when they are not truly seeing them. The food cart came down the path from the south entrance, moving slowly. One wheel pulled to the left, so the woman pushing it adjusted her grip every few steps. The cart was steel and white, bearing a handwritten sign that read, "Fried chicken, rice and beans, sweet tea." The letters had been painted in red by someone who had taken care with each stroke. The woman pushing it was Leora Kane. She was a woman in her middle years. She wore a white apron over a dark shirt, her hair tied back with a cloth the color of cayenne. She had been selling food in this park for some years. She knew the regulars. She knew the bench sitters. She knew those who had means and those who did not. And she fed both because that is what her grandmother had done and what she intended to keep doing. She saw the man on the third bench and slowed the cart. She did not stop at once. She looked at him. She looked at his hands. She looked at the suit. She looked at his face. She stood still for a moment, both hands on the cart handle, and did not move. She knew that face. She had seen it years earlier on the sidewalk in New Orleans on a day when she had almost nothing left and a daughter who had not eaten since the morning before. She had seen that face step from a black car and walk toward her folding table, order a plate, and eat it standing on the curb as though it were the finest thing he had tasted in years. She said his name, not loudly, not as a question. She said it the way one speaks a word carried for a long time and finally given reason to set down. He looked up. He did not recognize her. She had not expected him to. She had been one meal on one sidewalk on one afternoon years before. He had been the man who changed her life with a handwritten note and a sum that had meant everything. He had never asked to be repaid. She drew a container from the cart, fried chicken, rice, beans. She set it on the bench beside him. She offered no explanation. She said nothing more. She simply placed it there and stood waiting. He looked at the container. He did not open it. He sat with it beside him the way one sits with something one is not certain one deserves. The last time Leora had cooked for Elias was years earlier on a sidewalk in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, when she had almost nothing and a daughter who had not eaten since the morning before. She had not forgotten. She had spent years not forgetting. Elias grew up in a two-bedroom apartment on Halsey Street in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. His father, Samuel Voss, had come from Accra, Ghana years earlier with a trade certificate in plumbing and a modest sum carried in a cloth pouch his mother had sewn into the lining of his suitcase. Samuel found work quickly. He never stopped working after that. Elias's mother died when he was a boy. What began as a cough became something that filled her lungs within days. Samuel did not remarry. He did not slow down. He worked long hours repairing pipes, toilets, and boilers across Brooklyn, then came home each night to make dinner and check Elias's homework at the kitchen table with pipe grease still beneath his fingernails. The kitchen table was where everything important happened in that apartment. It was where Samuel told Elias about Ghana. It was where he explained how money worked. It was where he laid pay stubs beside bills each month and said, "This is what comes in, this is what goes out, and the difference is what keeps you alive." Elias learned to read a balance sheet before he learned to drive. He attended City College, studying finance, and graduated without debt because Samuel had set aside a small amount each month for many years without missing once. Samuel had given up small comforts for those years to make it possible. He never told Elias. Elias discovered the deposit slips in a drawer after Samuel suffered a stroke in his later years. Elias began in commercial real estate with small deals, a duplex in Crown Heights, a 4-unit building in East New York. He understood something most developers his age missed. There was steady value in affordable housing, not the kind that made magazine covers, but the kind that built slowly and endured. He mastered the tax credit system. The federal government offered tax credits to developers who built housing for low-income families. The credits were worth more than the rent collected. A developer could construct hundreds of units, charge rents working families could actually pay, and earn returns through credits that banks and investors would purchase. It was not charity. It was a business model that happened to serve people who needed serving. He explained it to his father once over dinner. Samuel listened carefully, then said the only thing he ever said about Elias's work. "So you make money by building homes people can afford?" Elias answered, "Yes." Samuel nodded. "That is the only kind of building worth doing." Elias built Ether Capital Partners from a single room on Fulton Street in Bed-Stuy. One assistant, one phone line. Over more than 2 decades, it grew into one of the larger affordable housing developers in the northeastern United States, with thousands of units across New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. His name appeared in major business publications. He sat on boards. He gave speeches. He hired people from the same blocks where his father had repaired pipes. He married Vivian Lang when he was in his 30s. She was a corporate attorney at a firm on Park Avenue, smart, precise, and spoke of ambition the way Samuel spoke of work, as something non-negotiable. Elias admired her because she reminded him of himself, driven, clear-eyed, unwilling to settle. They married in a small ceremony in Fort Greene Park. Samuel was there. He shook Vivian's hand and said, "Welcome to the family," then left early for a job the next morning. Elias did not see the difference between someone who admired what he built and someone who admired what he was worth. By the time he understood, the difference had cost him everything. Years earlier, when Elias had still held billions, Leora Kane stood on a sidewalk on Ursulines Avenue in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans with a folding table, a 2-burner stove, a cast-iron skillet, and a recipe her grandmother had written on the back of a church bulletin. She was a young woman then. Her daughter Mira was a small girl sitting behind the table with a coloring book and a cup of water that had been her only meal that morning. Leora had almost nothing left in her apron. She had spent nearly all of it on chicken, oil, flour, and seasoning. If she sold enough plates to cover the next day's supplies, she could continue. If not, she would have to find something else, and she had nothing else to find. The chicken was nearly done. She could tell by the sound of the oil, the way her grandmother had taught her. When the oil stops talking and begins to whisper, it is ready. She had a few plates left when the black car pulled up. A man stepped out. Tall in a dark suit, he looked as though he were between meetings. He stood for a moment looking at the table, the handwritten sign, the skillet. Then he walked over and ordered 1 plate. Leora served it in a simple container with a plastic fork and napkin. He stood right there on the curb, opened it, and ate. He did not sit. He didn't walk away. He ate, standing a few feet from the stove, and did not speak until he was halfway through. "Who taught you this?" he asked. "My grandmother. She's still cooking?" "She passed some years ago." He nodded. He finished the plate, looked at the table, the stove, the small girl behind it with her coloring book. He reached into his jacket and placed a sum on the table, far more than the price of the meal. Leora looked at the money. "That is too much." "It's not enough," he said. She pushed it back. He placed his hand flat over the bills and looked at her, not smiling, not performing, simply looking at her the way one looks when trying to say something words cannot hold. He lifted his hand and walked back to the car. He gave no name. He took no receipt. The car pulled away, and Leora stood with the money on her folding table, her daughter behind her, the oil still whispering in the skillet. Some days later, a lawyer called. A man named Elias Voss had paid months of rent on a fixed stall at the French market in the French Quarter. He had also covered a deposit on proper commercial kitchen equipment, a prep table, a fryer, ventilation. The total was covered, no conditions, no contract, no repayment terms. There was a note, handwritten on plain paper. The lawyer read it to her. "The food was worth more than what I paid. This is the rest." Leora had no phone number for him, no address. She had a note and a stall and equipment she could not have afforded in years of saving. She kept the note. She folded it into a small square and placed it inside the recipe her grandmother had written on the back of that church bulletin. She carried both for years. She never saw Elias Voss again. She did not know where he lived or the name of his company. She had only a face, a voice, a handwritten sentence, and years of remembering what it felt like when someone believed her food was worth more than the price paid. She did not forget. She built everything that came after on the foundation of not forgetting. Derek Hale joined Ether Capital Partners some years into its growth as chief financial officer. He was a man who understood capital structures the way a locksmith understands doors. Every lock had a mechanism. Every mechanism had a weakness. Derek had built his career on knowing where the weakness lay. Elias hired him because the company had grown beyond what one person could manage alone. Thousands of housing units, hundreds of millions in assets, federal tax credit rules, state compliance, bank relationships across several states. Elias needed someone who could handle the numbers while he handled the buildings, the people, and the communities they served. Derek handled the numbers. He handled them in ways Elias did not fully see. Some years into his role, Derek began redirecting development capital away from affordable housing projects and into luxury condominium developments in Manhattan and Westchester County. He did not tell Elias. He did not need to. The corporate structure gave the CFO authority over fund allocation within approved categories. Derek created new categories and approved them himself. He filed the paperwork under names that sounded like the community work Elias had always done, names suggesting neighborhood and belonging. The projects behind those names were high-end condominiums for people who had never set foot in the neighborhoods the names evoked. Derek used the company's credit lines to finance these developments and secured bank loans against the existing portfolio. Buried inside the loan covenants were personal guarantee clauses that tied Elias's name and personal assets to the debt. Elias signed the annual filings. He read the summaries Derek prepared. He did not read the covenants. He did not read the guarantee clauses. He trusted his CFO. That is what one does when someone has managed the money for years and every number has always been right. When the luxury market tightened, the condominiums did not sell. The loans came due. The banks called the guarantees. Elias's personal assets, the house in Connecticut, the investment accounts, the retirement fund, were all collateral for debt he had not known he was carrying. Derek had moved his own assets into his wife's name years before the market turned. His exposure was zero. Elias's exposure was everything. The lawyers explained it in a conference room on an ordinary afternoon. They used words like leveraged exposure, personal guarantee liability, cross-collateralization. What they meant was that Derek had used Elias's name to borrow money Elias had never approved for projects Elias had never seen. And now every dollar Elias had earned was owed to banks that did not care how it had happened. Elias lost Ether Capital Partners. He lost the house. He lost the accounts. He lost the retirement fund. He lost more than 2 decades of building something meant to serve communities, only to discover it had been hollowed out from within by a man who understood mechanisms and weaknesses and had found both in Elias's trust. Vivian filed for divorce not long after the company collapsed. She did not ask how he was. She did not ask what had happened. She called her divorce attorney before she called her husband. The prenuptial agreement she had drafted herself years earlier protected everything she had brought into the marriage and everything she had earned independently. She had written that document when they were in love. She had written it like a lawyer, not like a wife. The difference became clear the morning she served the papers. Quentin Voss, a young man with an MBA, called his mother first. He did not call his father. Vivian controlled the educational trust she had set up for him years earlier. The trust held a substantial sum. Quentin understood where the money was. He chose accordingly. He did not call his father for months. Elias walked out of the house in Connecticut with one suitcase, a rental car, and the modest sum left in a personal checking account Derek's restructuring had overlooked because it was too small to notice. Everything else was gone: the company, the house, the accounts, the wife, the son, the name that had once opened every door. He drove to New York and checked into a rooming house on 125th Street in Harlem. The room was small, a single bed against the wall, a dresser with one sticking drawer, a window overlooking a fire escape, and another window where someone had taped a bedsheet as a curtain. The bathroom was shared down the hall. The shower had two temperatures, cold and almost cold. The walls were thin enough that he could hear the subway pass beneath the building at regular intervals. He had nothing else to count. He paid weekly, in cash. The landlord, Mrs. Okoro, lived on the first floor and collected rent on Mondays in an envelope slid under her door. She asked no questions. She made no conversation. She took the envelope and nodded, and that was the transaction. Elias did not eat on any schedule. Some days he bought a coffee and a roll from the corner bodega. Some days he ate nothing at all, not because he could not afford to, but because eating required deciding where to go and what to order. And those were decisions that belonged to a person whose life was organized around other decisions. Elias no longer had those other decisions. He walked to Marcus Garvey Park every afternoon. Same entrance, same path, same bench. The third one from the north side beneath a tree that gave shade until late afternoon, then let the sun through in long strips across the pavement. He sat there from mid-afternoon until the light changed. He watched joggers, mothers with strollers, food vendors setting up in the morning from his window and packing up in the evening from his bench. He had spent more than 2 decades in rooms where people waited for him to speak. Conference rooms, boardrooms, hotel ballrooms where his name was on the program, and hundreds sat in rows waiting to hear what he saw that they did not. He had been Elias Voss. The name meant something. It opened doors, filled rooms, made phones ring. Now the phone did not ring. He checked it out of habit. There were no messages, no missed calls, no calendar reminders. The screen was empty the way a room is empty after everyone has left and no one has returned. He did not know what to do with his hands. He did not know what to do with his hours. He had built a company that employed hundreds and managed thousands of homes. Now he sat on a bench and watched pigeons land on the path and take off again. And he understood, for the first time, that he had never learned who he was without the company. The company had answered every question. Who are you? What do you do? Why are you here? Without it, the questions had no answers, and Elias sat with them every afternoon on the same bench and did not know what to say. After some days, a man with a hot dog cart parked near the north entrance handed him a bottle of water. Elias had not asked for it. He had not spoken to the man. The man simply walked over, held it out, and said, "You look like you need it," then returned to his cart. Elias held the bottle in both hands for a long while. He did not open it immediately. It was the first time in weeks that someone had spoken to him like a person. Not like a debtor, not like a case number, not like a name on a filing, but like a man sitting on a bench who looked as though he needed water. He called his father that evening. Samuel was in his later years, still living in the apartment on Halsey Street, still sharp, still rising early out of habit, even though he had not worked in some time. Elias told him he was in Harlem. He did not say why. Samuel did not ask. He asked one question. "You eating?" Elias said yes. Samuel said, "Then you are fine." That was the whole call. He had been sitting on that bench for many days when the food cart appeared. "You already know who she is. You already know who he is, but neither knew what the other had become. Leora Kane had not stayed on that sidewalk in Tremé. The stall at the French market that Elias had paid for became the foundation of everything she built afterward. She ran it for some years, hired help, built a lunch crowd that lined up before the market opened. Mira grew up behind that counter, doing homework on a folding chair between the fryer and the register. Then a major hurricane came through. The market flooded. The equipment was destroyed. The stall was gone. Insurance covered part. Not enough. Leora spent months cleaning up, filing claims, and staying with family before she made a decision. She would not rebuild in a place that could be taken by water again. She would go somewhere the ground did not flood. She moved to New York, to Harlem. She bought a used food cart from a vendor in the Bronx. She obtained her permits. She began selling on 125th Street and in Marcus Garvey Park. The same food, the same recipe, the same chicken her grandmother had taught her and that Elias had tasted once on a sidewalk years before. Mira was now in her teens, doing well in school, dreaming of studying biology and going to college. Leora did not speak of that part aloud, because speaking of it made it feel like a promise, and she had learned not to promise what she could not yet deliver. Leora did not tell Elias any of this the first day. She did not tell him the second day either. She set the food down. She said, "Same time tomorrow." He nodded. She came back. Over the following days, the pattern held. A container of rice and beans and chicken. She set it on the bench. She left. After some days, he opened the container before she walked away. She noticed, but said nothing. A few days later, he said, "Thank you." The first words he had spoken to her since they met again. Some days after that, she sat on the bench beside him for a little while. Neither spoke. She rose and returned to the cart. Over the next days, he ate while she was still there. She watched him eat. The chicken carried cayenne and honey and something sweet beneath that he could taste but could not name. Something that reminded him of a kitchen he had never entered. Something that tasted like food passed down not in books, but in hands. He did not know he was tasting a recipe written on the back of a church bulletin decades earlier. He did not know the woman beside him had carried that recipe across years, a hurricane, and a move to a city where she knew no one. He only knew the food tasted as though it had been made by someone who meant it. After some more days, he began to speak. He told her about Derek, about the loans, about the guarantee clauses he had signed without reading, about Vivian and the prenup and the swift departure, about Quentin and the phone call that never came. He told her all of it sitting on that bench with an empty container between them and the afternoon light moving through the trees. Leora listened. She did not interrupt. She did not offer advice. She did not say she was sorry. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. Then she asked one question. "Do you still have the records?" Elias looked at her. He did not understand at first. "Records of what?" she asked again. "The financial records from your company. Do you still have them?" He did. He had a portable hard drive in his suitcase at the rooming house. He had kept copies of everything, every quarterly report, every loan document, every fund allocation. He had kept them the way one keeps things when one does not know what else to do with them. Not as evidence, not as strategy, but as habit. The same habit that made him check his phone for messages that never arrived. "I know someone," Leora said. Howard Klein was a man in his later years with an office on Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. He wore reading glasses on a chain around his neck and ate fried chicken from Leora's cart every week at a regular hour. He had been doing so for some years. He was particular about the breast piece, always asked for extra hot sauce, always paid exact change, and told Leora the chicken was better than his mother's, and that if she ever repeated it, he would deny it. Howard was a forensic accountant and attorney who specialized in white-collar financial fraud. He had spent decades following money through structures designed to make it disappear. Shell companies, offshore trusts, nominee directors. He understood them the way a plumber understands pipes. You find the source, you trace the flow, you find where it leaks. Leora brought Elias to Howard's office one afternoon. She did not call ahead. She brought 2 containers of chicken, left one at the reception desk, carried the other to Howard's door, and knocked. "Mr. Klein, this man needs a few minutes." Howard looked at Elias. He looked at the chicken. He waved them in. Elias opened the hard drive on Howard's desk and showed him the files. The fund allocation reports, the loan covenants, the project filings. Howard read through them slowly. He put his glasses on. He took them off. He put them on again. He did not speak for a long while. Then he looked up. "This is not bankruptcy," Howard said. "This is theft. There is a difference, and the difference is prison time." He explained it plainly. When someone takes a company into debt through poor decisions, that is failure. When someone takes a company into debt by redirecting funds into shell projects, forging allocation reports, and burying personal guarantee clauses in documents the CEO never approved, that is fraud. The first is a business matter. The second is a federal matter. The line between them is intent, and the documents on that hard drive showed intent on every page. Howard took the case, not out of charity, but because this was the kind of case he had been waiting for. One with enough money and enough paper trail to matter, and because Derek Hale was the kind of man Howard had spent decades learning to catch. He made one phone call that afternoon. The person on the other end had been waiting for years for someone to bring a case exactly like this. The call went to a senior enforcement attorney at the SEC regional office in New York. She had been building a file on irregularities in the affordable housing tax credit market for years and had not found a victim willing to come forward with documentation. Most victims of financial fraud do not know they are victims. They think they failed. They think the market turned. They think they made bad decisions. They do not realize someone stole from them because the theft was designed to look like misfortune. Elias had the documentation. Howard had the expertise. The SEC had the jurisdiction. The investigation moved quickly. Within a short time, a forensic audit team was assigned. They began tracing fund flows from Ether Capital Partners through a web of shell companies registered in Delaware. The companies had names that sounded legitimate, names suggesting development and community. Behind every name was a mailbox, a registered agent, and nothing else. Derek Hale had moved a substantial sum through these entities over years. He had used the money to purchase luxury properties in his wife's name and in the names of associates who existed only on paper. He had also convinced other investors to pledge personal assets as collateral for developments that were never built. The total exposure across all victims was vast. The investigation reached Vivian weeks later. The forensic team found a trust created years before the divorce. It was managed by Derek. It held a significant portion of Vivian's personal assets. The trust was referenced in the prenuptial agreement she had written herself, the same agreement that had protected her when she left Elias. The connection was not proof that Vivian had participated in the fraud, but it was proof that she knew Derek, that she had entrusted her own money to him, that she had created a legal structure keeping her assets safe while her husband's assets were used as collateral for loans he never knew existed. The timing was not coincidence. The structure was not accident. Vivian hired a criminal defense attorney days after the SEC contacted her. She did not call Elias. She did not call Quentin. She called a lawyer. Quentin learned of it through a brief item in a major business publication about an SEC investigation into Ether Capital Partners and related entities. He read the article twice. He saw his mother's name. He saw the trust. He saw the dates. He sat with his phone for a long time. Then he called his father. For the first time in months, Elias answered on the second ring. He did not say hello. He waited. Quentin did not speak at first. The silence was the kind that happens when someone is trying to find the right sentence and realizing there is none. "Dad," he said, "I didn't know." Elias closed his eyes. He did not say it was all right. He did not say he forgave him. He said, "I know," and meant it. He had spent decades building housing for families and understood that the structures people build to protect themselves are not always the structures that keep them safe. Quentin had protected himself by choosing the parent with the money. It had been a calculation. Elias did not blame him for the math. He blamed himself for building a life where the math was all that remained. Vivian had hosted a regular monthly gathering at her apartment on the Upper West Side for years. 12 women, same table, same caterer, same flowers in the center. She sent invitations by email on the first Monday of each month, and replies came back within hours. Always yes, always 12. The month after the SEC investigation became public, she sent the invitations. She ordered the flowers. She had the caterers prepare for 12. She set the table herself that morning. 12 plates, 12 glasses, 12 linen napkins folded the way she had learned from a magazine years earlier. No one came, not one reply, not one apology, not one message saying something had come up. 12 empty chairs around a table set for 12. Vivian sat at the head of that table for a long while before she stood and began clearing the plates herself. The State Bar Association opened a review of her license weeks after the SEC filing. The trust she had created with Derek as manager was not illegal on its own, but the timing and structure raised questions her firm did not want to answer on her behalf. The firm released a statement that Vivian Lang was no longer affiliated with them. They used the word affiliated the way one uses a word when one wants to make it sound as though the person was never truly there. Her license was suspended pending investigation, not revoked, but suspended. The difference mattered legally. It did not matter practically. No client would retain an attorney whose name appeared in a federal fraud filing. The phone stopped ringing the same way Elias's had, slowly at first, then all at once. Derek Hale was arrested on a weekday morning in his office on Park Avenue. He was wearing the same suit he had worn to a charity event the weekend before. He was escorted through the lobby. The receptionist watched. The security guard held the door. A photographer from a major publication was already on the sidewalk. Derek did not look at the camera. He looked at the ground the way people look when they are calculating what comes next and realizing the calculation has stopped working. Vivian called Elias one evening. His phone lit up on the counter in Leora's kitchen, where he had been helping prepare for the next morning. He saw the name on the screen. He looked at it for a long time. The phone rang several times. He did not pick up, not because he was angry. He had been angry months earlier. The anger had come, stayed, and left the way weather passes. What replaced it was not forgiveness. It was not bitterness. It was nothing. He had nothing left to say to her. Not because she had hurt him, though she had, but because the person she had hurt no longer existed. The man who needed Vivian's approval, the man who confused admiration with love, had disappeared somewhere between the bench in the park, the food cart, and the days of quiet Leora had given him without asking for anything in return. He placed the phone face down on the counter and went back to chopping onions. Vivian was not a villain. She was something harder to name. She was a woman who had married a version of a man, and when that version disappeared, she did not know how to stay. She had never loved Elias. She had loved what he represented, the rooms he opened, the tables she sat at because of his name, the version of her own life his success made possible. When the success was gone, there was nothing beneath to hold her there. That was not cruelty. That was emptiness, and emptiness is its own punishment because no one has to deliver it. It simply arrives. Elias began working at the food cart on a Monday. Leora did not ask him to. He showed up early when she was loading the cart and started carrying trays without a word. She looked at him. She did not say no. He did not know how to fry chicken. He did not know the oil temperature. He did not know how long to let the flour sit before dredging. Leora showed him once, then let him fail. He burned the first few pieces. She threw them out without comment. He got the next one right. She nodded. That was the entire lesson. The food cart operated under a mobile vending permit from the city health department. The permit cost a modest amount every couple of years, but the wait list was long. Leora had bought hers secondhand from a retiring vendor. She had paid a substantial sum for the permit alone. The cart itself was another cost. Insurance, propane, supplies. On a good day, she cleared a few hundred after expenses. On a bad day, rain, cold, a street closure, she cleared nothing and still owed for the food she had prepared. Elias had once managed a portfolio worth hundreds of millions. He had signed checks larger than Leora's annual revenue. He had sat in rooms where people discussed deals worth more than every food cart in the city combined. And he had never once understood what it took to earn a living standing over a fryer in summer heat on a Harlem sidewalk for long hours. He understood it now. He understood it by doing it, by standing beside Leora, watching her work, seeing that every dollar she earned was tied to a physical act. Flour on her hands, oil on her apron, sweat on her forehead. There was no spreadsheet between her effort and her income. No abstraction. No leverage. Just a woman, a skillet, and a line of people who returned because the food was real. Street food vendors are among the most resilient small business operators in the country. They survive weather, permits, competition, theft, and equipment failure on margins that would make many analysts walk away. Leora was one of thousands of permitted vendors in New York City. She earned her living on one of the most competitive sidewalks in the world, and she did it every single day. Mira came to the cart after school most days. She sat on an overturned crate and did her homework while the line formed. One afternoon, she looked up from her textbook and said, "Mr. Elias, can you help me with this?" It was a personal finance assignment, budgeting, income, and expenses, savings goals, the kind that teaches young people what money means before they have any. Elias sat on the crate beside her. He took the worksheet. He read through it slowly. Then he began explaining. Not the way he had once explained tax credit structures to investors, not the way he had presented at conferences. He explained it the way his father had explained money to him at the kitchen table on Halsey Street. This is what comes in. This is what goes out. The difference is what keeps you going. He spent a good while on that worksheet. He drew diagrams on the back of a napkin. He used Leora's cart as an example: revenue, cost of goods, fixed costs, variable costs, profit margin. He made it real. He made it specific. He made it something a teenager could hold in her hands and use. He had never done that for Quentin. He had paid for Quentin's education. He had funded the MBA. But he had never sat beside his son and explained how money actually worked in a voice that was patient and meant for one person. He had been too busy building, too busy managing, too busy being Elias Voss to be Quentin's father. He sat on that crate beside Mira and taught her what his own father had taught him and what he had failed to teach his own son. And he understood, for the first time, that the note he had written years earlier was more true than he had known. The food was worth more than what he had paid. It was worth more than any sum he had once held. It was worth a second chance at learning what mattered. Leora had given him a plate of chicken. He had given her a stall at a market, and now, years later, she had given him something no amount of money could purchase. She had given him a reason to rise in the morning that had nothing to do with a balance sheet. The restitution came through on a Friday. Howard called Elias at the rooming house and told him to come to the office. Elias walked the 12 blocks. He could have taken a cab. He walked. He had grown used to walking. Howard had a folder on his desk. Inside was a summary from the federal receiver. Derek Hale had been convicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. His assets had been seized and frozen. The total recovery distributed across all identified victims based on documented losses gave Elias a substantial share. Howard explained the math. The total documented fraud was vast across multiple victims. Full restitution was never possible in cases like these. The money gets spent, hidden, moved beyond easy reach. What Elias received was better than most fraud victims ever see. Most receive pennies on the dollar. Most receive nothing. Elias sat with the number. It was not what he had once held. It was not close. But he was not the same man who had needed that former sum. He was a man who had learned to fry chicken, chop onions, and teach a teenager how to balance a budget on the back of a napkin. The sum, to that man, was something different. It was enough. He looked at Howard. "How much do I need to do what I am thinking of doing?" Howard leaned back. "What are you thinking of doing?" Elias told him. Howard sat with it for a while. He took his glasses off. He put them back on. "That would work," he said. The The building stood on Frederick Douglass Boulevard between 125th and 126th Streets, a former garment warehouse, 3 stories, 12,000 square feet. It had been empty for some years. The owner was a holding company based elsewhere that had been trying to sell it for years at a price no one in the neighborhood could meet. Elias knew how to read a building. He knew how to read a market. He knew what a property was worth when the seller had been waiting too long and carrying costs were eating into returns. He offered a sum well below the asking price. The holding company accepted within a week because something now was better than more that had not come in years. He had the plans drawn in weeks, not by a large corporate firm, but by a woman named Dell Okafor, who ran a small practice on Lenox Avenue and understood what the neighborhood needed because she had lived there for decades. The Kane Voss Community Kitchen, a food hall on the ground floor with multiple vendor stalls, a shared commercial kitchen on the second floor available to permitted vendors who could not afford their own equipment, and a business incubator on the 3rd floor offering mentorship, accounting support, and access to small business banking for food entrepreneurs who had never had a bank account in their business name. The model was simple: low fixed costs for vendors, shared infrastructure, professional support for people who knew how to cook but did not know how to file taxes, negotiate a lease, or build credit. The kind of support that turns a food cart into a food business. The kind of structure Elias had spent decades building and housing and had never thought to build in food. He showed Leora the plans one evening. They sat at her kitchen table. Mira was in the next room doing homework. Elias unrolled the blueprints and laid them flat between the salt shaker and the napkin holder. Leora looked at the plans. She looked at the layout. She looked at the name printed across the top of the page. She did not speak for a long time. "You're putting my name on a building," she said. "Your food put me back on my feet," Elias said. "Your name goes first. Kane Voss, not Voss Kane. Her name first, his name second. The way it should have been from the beginning, because she was the one who showed up with a plate of food and asked nothing in return. And that is the kind of thing that deserves to go first." Leora looked at the plans again. She placed her hand flat on the paper the way Elias had once placed his hand, flat over money on a sidewalk in Tremé years earlier. The same gesture, different decade, different city, same meaning. Elias established a scholarship fund for the children of food vendors in Harlem, enough for several full tuition scholarships at city colleges each year. Mira was the first recipient. The acceptance letter came from Hunter College, biology, pre-med track. She read it at the kitchen table. She looked at her mother. Leora looked back at her daughter. Neither spoke. The letter sat on the table between them beside the blueprints, the salt shaker, and the napkin holder. A kitchen table in a Harlem apartment where everything real was happening. Quentin showed up on the day it opened. He did not call ahead. He did not text. He took the train to 125th Street, walked the blocks north to Frederick Douglass Boulevard, and stood on the sidewalk outside the Kane Voss Community Kitchen with his hands in his pockets, looking at the sign. His father's name was on it, second, after Kane. Quentin stood there for a while reading it. He had grown up seeing his father's name first on everything, on the company, on letterhead, on every building directory. Always first, not here. Here, his father's name came second, behind a woman Quentin had never heard of, behind a name he could not yet pronounce. He stood on that sidewalk and looked at the sign and understood something he had not understood months earlier when he chose his mother's money over his father's phone call. The man who needed his name first on everything was gone. The man inside this building had chosen to put someone else's name ahead of his own. That was not weakness. That was something Quentin did not yet have a word for. He walked in. The ground floor was full, multiple vendor stalls, the smell of frying oil and spices and rice and roasted peppers filling the room. People ate at long communal tables. People stood in line. People talked to vendors through open windows as though they had been doing it for years, even though the doors had opened that morning. Quentin found his father in the kitchen behind Leora's stall. Elias wore a white apron, sleeves rolled up, flour on his hands, oil on the front of the apron, standing over a fryer lowering chicken into the oil, with tongs the way someone does when they have done it enough times to stop thinking about it. Quentin stood in the doorway. Elias looked up. He saw his son. He did not speak. He looked at him for a moment. Then he turned back to the friar. Quentin stood there for a couple of minutes. The oil crackled. The exhaust fan hummed. Leora moved past him carrying a tray and did not stop. No one told him to come in. No one told him to leave. He walked to the counter. He picked up an apron from the hook on the wall. He put it on. He stood next to his father. He did not say he was sorry. He did not explain. He simply stood there. Elias did not look at him. He handed him the tongs. They worked side by side for the rest of the afternoon, frying chicken, plating orders, wiping the counter, not talking, not needing to. The kitchen was loud and hot, and full of the kind of work that does not require conversation. The kind of work Samuel Voss had done every day on Halsey Street, fixing pipes beside his son, not speaking of love, simply being there, showing up with hands, and staying until the work was done. That was how the men in the family repaired things, not with apologies, not with speeches, but with presence, with labor, with standing beside someone and doing the work until the silence between them stopped being empty and became enough. Vivian did not come. She did not call. Her story had ended in an apartment on the Upper West Side with 12 empty chairs and a table set for people who were never coming back. Not everyone returns. Not every thread gets tied. That is not a failure of the story. That is the story. Quentin stayed until closing. He helped stack the chairs. He helped mop the floor. When the lights were off and the kitchen was clean and the building was quiet, he stood outside on the sidewalk with his father. Neither spoke for a while. The street was dark. The sign above the door was lit from beneath. Kane Voss Community Kitchen. "I like the name," Quentin said. Elias looked at the sign. "She earned it," he said. That was all. They walked to the subway together. Quentin went south. Elias went north, 2 blocks to the rooming house on 125th Street where he still lived, because he had not yet decided where to go next, and because the room had become familiar. And familiar was something he had learned not to waste. Derek had his lawyers. Vivian had her prenup. Quentin had his trust. Leora had a food cart and a years-old handwritten note folded inside a recipe written on the back of a church bulletin. Every one of those things was a form of protection. Every one was designed to keep something safe. The lawyers protected Derek until they could not. The prenup protected Vivian until there was nothing left to protect. The trust protected Quentin until it became the reason he stopped calling his father. The note protected Leora in a different way. It did not protect her money or her assets. It protected something that has no line item on a balance sheet. It protected her belief that a stranger could be kind without wanting something in return. And she carried that belief for years through a hurricane, a move to a new city, and years of pushing a food cart through rain and heat and cold on the sidewalks of Harlem. When she saw the man who had written that note sitting on a park bench with nothing, she did not calculate what he was worth. She calculated what he needed: a plate of food, a seat at the table, someone to show up the next day and the day after without asking why. The financial system is built on structures: tax credits, trusts, shell companies, prenuptial agreements, personal guarantees. These structures can build communities. They can also hollow them out from within. The difference is not in the structure. The difference is in the person holding it. Derek held the same tools Elias held. One used them to build thousands of homes for families who needed them. The other used them to take a vast sum from people who trusted him. The tools do not tell you who someone is. The way they use them does. Elias Voss had once held billions and lost it. He had a wife who left swiftly. He had a son who chose the money. He had a partner who stole everything. And the person who saved him was a woman he had met once on a sidewalk in New Orleans, who remembered what he had done with a sum and a handwritten note, and who showed up with a plate of chicken years later and said, "Same time tomorrow." The people who leave when you have nothing were never there for you. The people who show up with a plate of food and ask nothing in return, those are the ones who were always there. You simply could not see them when the room was full. You only see them when the room is empty, and they are the only ones still standing in the doorway. Some people build their lives around what they can protect on paper. Elias learned the hard way that the things worth protecting do not fit on paper. They fit in a kitchen. They fit in a handwritten note. They fit in a recipe that travels from one city to another inside a folding chair and a cast iron skillet and a woman who never forgot. If someone showed up for you after many years, not because they owed you, not because they wanted something, but because they remembered what you did when they had nothing, would you trust it? Or would you wonder what they wanted? Leave your thoughts below. If this story reminded you of someone who showed up for you when no one else did, send it to them. They probably do not hear it enough. See you in the next one.